In 1980, the life expectancy in Zimbabwe was just under 60 when Mugabe took over. By 2006, it was down to 37 for men and 34 for women. In just over 25 years, Mugabe had overseen a near halving in life expectancy in Zimbabwe. How in the world did this happen, especially at a time when other African countries were seeing increases in life expectancy during post-colonial rule? Today, we look at the factors that caused this. Now, just a bit about who Mugabe was. Robert Mugabe was a Zimbabwean revolutionary and politician who played a critical role in his country's struggle for independence. He eventually became Zimbabwe's prime minister and then president. He was a key figure in the Zimbabwe African National Union, also known as ZANU. This was one of the liberation movements fighting against a white minority rule in Rhodesia, which is now modern-day Zimbabwe. He was imprisoned for over a decade in the 60s and 70s for making anti-government comments. But after he was released, he would continue to lead in the armed struggle against a predominantly white government led by Ian Smith. Alongside other liberation leaders, Mugabe would engage in negotiations and diplomatic efforts to resolve matters peacefully. By 1980, Zimbabwe had gained independence from British colonial rule, and Mugabe became the country's first prime minister. By 1987, he then changed the country's constitution and became executive president and consolidated his power. His rule became increasingly authoritarian, and his government faced accusations of human rights abuses and political repression. His rule was marked by economic decline and political isolation. In 2017, after nearly 4 years of effectively running a dictatorship, he was ousted by power after military intervention and then resigned as president. In general, public outlook towards him is complex. In 2017, after nearly 4 decades of effectively running a dictatorship, he was ousted from power after a military intervention and resigned as president. And that brings us to the question of this video. What exactly did Mugabe do to oversee such a decline in life expectancy during his rule? There are so many factors, but today we're going to focus on 3. A perfect storm. The first was Mugabe's implementation of a land reform policy once he gained power. This had deep historical roots. During British colonial rule, indigenous black Zimbabweans were forcibly dispossessed of their land with little or no compensation. After gaining independence in 1980, the Zimbabwean government faced pressure to address the land issues and address historical injustices, as the majority of arable land was still owned by a small minority of white farmers. In the 90s, Mugabe's government decided to introduce a fast-track land reform program to redistribute land more equitably and provide land to landless black Zimbabweans. The process involved the seizure of commercial farms, often through compulsory acquisition and without full compensation to white farmers. In other words, attempting to correct historical wrongs by conducting present-day wrongs. This approach was criticized for its lack of transparency and adherence to rule of law. Land seizures were often also accompanied by violence and intimidation, leading to the displacement of farmers and their workers. Overall, the land reform program shifted ownership of land from commercial farmers to a mix of small-scale farmers, government officials, and political elites. Some of these farmers did not have the actual resources or skills to maintain productive farms, as those who had the expertise and technical knowledge had been expelled. These abrupt land seizures disrupted established agricultural practices, including crop rotations, irrigation systems, and infrastructure. This caused a sharp decline in agricultural output, leading to food shortages and reduced food security. Famine and malnutrition resulted in a humanitarian crisis affecting vulnerable populations such as children and the elderly. Zimbabwe, once known as the breadbasket of Africa and a net exporter of food, became dependent on imports to feed its population. Now that's crazy. This collapse of the agricultural sector, which was a key contributor to the country's economy, had a ripple effect across all other sectors. Unemployment rose, foreign exchange earnings decreased, and investor confidence plummeted. And this brings me to the next factor, hyperinflation. The reduced agricultural output and foreign exchange earnings weakened the economy's ability to generate any real value. This was coupled with misguided economic policies from the government under Mugabe. The government engaged in excessive money printing to cover budgets and to finance government spending. This is a tactic that always works, as we know from human history. This led to a massive increase in the supply of money and was a primary driver in hyperinflation, as the value of the currency completely eroded. Prices rose at an astronomical rate, doubling or tripling daily at times. People would need huge stacks of currency notes to buy basic necessities, which led to practical difficulties in carrying out everyday transactions. It wiped out people's savings, pensions, and investments that were in the Zimbabwean dollar. This left many in complete financial ruin. Businesses struggled to operate and many closed down due to uncertainty, lack of access to credit, and the inability to access basic supplies. People lost their jobs, poverty rates soared, and the standard of living plummeted. People were forced to make difficult choices between necessities and as a result cut back on food and other essentials such as healthcare expenses. This led to a steep decline in overall quality of life. In short, this was a disaster. And now this is where the perfect storm comes, which brings me to the third and final factor, the HIV and AIDS epidemic. Zimbabwe faced one of the highest rates of the disease in the world at the turn of the century. The virus spread rapidly due to lack of awareness, inadequate sexual education, and limited access to contraception. As we have already seen based on how things were already going in the country, the healthcare system was not prepared to deal with the overwhelming number of cases. Hospitals and clinics lacked proper equipment, medical supplies, and trained personnel to diagnose and treat the disease. And in turn, Mugabe's government failed to respond adequately to combat the dire situation. The government failed to allocate sufficient funds, leading to the healthcare sector suffering from chronic underfunding. Due to the already deteriorating economic situation, a significant number of skilled medical professionals also left the country, leaving a lack of skilled workers to combat the crisis. The government has also been criticized for its initial reluctance to openly address HIV and AIDS and its associated stigma. This hindered efforts to create an environment where people could openly seek testing, treatment, and support. As the epidemic spread, the average life expectancy began to decline. People with HIV faced shortened lifespans, with mortality rates rising, particularly amongst younger adults. And just to be clear, this is not just a thing of the past. Although the situation is better today, it's still a battle that Zimbabwe is currently fighting. All in all, the impact of Robert Mugabe's leadership on Zimbabwe's decline in life expectancy is a sobering lesson of the far-reaching consequences that political decisions can have. Under his rule, a perfect storm of factors, from the economic mismanagement to the healthcare neglect, created a devastating scenario for the nation's health. The erosion of healthcare infrastructure, the lack of effective governance, and the poor response to the HIV and AIDS epidemic all played a part in driving life expectancy downwards. This decline not also robbed individuals of potential years, but also left an indelible mark on families, communities, and the nation as a whole. Let this lesson serve as a reminder of the profound effect that governance can have on public health. The story of Zimbabwe underscores the vital importance of effective policies, access to quality healthcare, and a commitment to addressing the challenges that threaten the well-being of a nation's people. And hopefully this reflection can inspire us to strive for leadership that places the health and prosperity of its citizens at the forefront.